event for me because we lived at Empire Bay and we had no transport. It meant we had to catch an early morning ferry to Woy Woy and catch a train to Gosford. There were only 2 steam trains a day. And we arrived up in Gosford, and then of course we had to walk up Fawn Street, up that hill to the opening.
It was a very exciting day to me to be involved in something of such importance to the district.
And I was there in the, which is now the day surgery ward, as the only patient, and I got out of bed for the first time to watch the opening of the hospital down below.
Gosford Hospital finally became a reality on the 26th of May 1945. With much ceremony, the New South Wales Minister for Health, Mr Gus Kelly, performed the official opening. It was the culmination of decades of hard work and lobbying by the residents of the Central Coast, and especially the fundraising efforts of Gosford Times publisher Bob Baker and local identity Richard Clifford. The Gosford district in the early days was a pioneering community. The only medical help available was in the form of a few self-appointed midwives, and it wasn't until 45 years later, after 2 world wars and a depression, that the foundation stone of the Gosford and District Hospital was eventually laid in November 1943.
It was just a wonder that, you know, ended up chairman of such an area, but I was the first patient operated on in Gosford Hospital by Dr Burns. The operating theatre at that stage, they hadn't even painted the name on the door. And Bill Ellis, an old signwriter of this town that some old people would remember, was painting the operating theatre when they wheeled me in. And Dr Burns operated on me then, and Sister Bell gave the anaesthetic.
I joined the staff on its inception the 3rd of April, Noni has, going back 45, and enrolled as the first trainee when it became a training school, and completed the training in October 51. And when we finished, I've kept her for 50 years, but Sister Bell would present each of us with a little handmade celluloid doll, and the hospital presented us with a glass syringe. I suppose it was for private practice, but I treasure my little doll from Sister Bell. And I came from the inner city in Glebe, and Gladdy came from the country, Boyne Creek. So I was terribly homesick, stuck in the country. And only for Gladdy I wouldn't have lasted, and Matron Knight. Because Matron Knight would say, "Come on, you sook, I'll take you home to your mummy for the weekend." And come back, and we lasted, didn't we? But it was different. We had to do everything. We set it all up.
We had to build up the number of operations, and major operations, not just tonsillectomies. Mm-hmm. So if you had a pain in the tummy, you had your appendix out. And I always think that I'm probably the only person in Gosford that set up for my own appendix, because a couple of months after the hospital started, we always had to leave the theatre set up ready for any emergencies, and I'd spent the Sunday afternoon getting the theatre all in order for the operations the coming week, and I took sick that night on the Sunday night, and I had my appendix out. So I'm rather proud that I set the theatre up for my own appendix.
Well, you knew it was done properly. So we got a good training, good experience in all fields. I can always remember Olaf Spence come home from the war too, and he was a surgeon, and at those times they even amputated legs in casualty, and I said to him as a scared little nurse, "Make sure I've got everything on the trolley." And his words were, "A good surgeon can operate by candlelight in a tent with a knife and fork." Oh. So I always remember that every time I set up anything for any operation. As the years went on, and we did get more staff, and we had to share bedrooms, and this veranda was built. We were always cold, and when we'd go out and come home, we'd sleep 2 and 3 in our bed out in the veranda because we could share our 3 eiderdowns on top. because it wasn't closed in those days. But also, if anybody died at that time and it was during the night, you had to carry the body out. And the more, it was bushland setting, wasn't it? And I can always remember the mist. I don't recollect who was helping me, but anyhow, there was a misty night, cold night, and the sister carried the lantern and the two nurses carried the stretcher. And as we got halfway to the mortuary, the owls hooted in the trees, and we dropped the body and we ran back inside all screaming like mad. And it was left there till daylight because we were
Too scared to go
we were
back.
too scared. And we had one boy, Bernie Fraser, who had a truck. And after we'd knock off a night, he would take, all of us would jump on the back of a truck, grab our eiderdowns and for entertain out to Wamburrell Lakes and catch some prawns and light a fire and cook the prawns. But we also had local dancers, Maddox's Hall we met, and we had our dancing there. And the Maddox family consists of great members of the auxiliary, weren't they? And they also had 8 sons that were all musical. And there was the CWA, so we had plenty of entertainment because the Regal Theatre was there. Was it called the Regal?
There was the Valencia Theatre.
The Valencia Theatre.
But there were 3 dances we had choice of, most Friday and Saturday night.
It was a small hospital in those days. There were only 35 beds. All the doctors worked together. There was very little rivalry between the doctors. They were all very friendly, and took turn about with the accident and emergency call. No residents. One of my favourite memories was at the time one of the men from the town who supplied the hospital with all its milk and dairy products went to the hospital in his shorts and his thongs to get an x-ray of a foot that he'd hurt at work. And the x-ray man naturally asked for his £2.10 in advance, otherwise he couldn't do his x-ray. The gentleman said he didn't have anything on him at the time, but he could soon go home and get it, and they suggested, well, he'd better go home and get the money to bring it back. He said, well, that's pretty good. He said, I can be back here in a little while, he said, but I wouldn't mind the £300 or £400 that the hospital owes me for last month's milk by the time I get back.
Yes, well, my husband worked for Fraser Lee's, Fraser's, the butchers in those days, and he used to go up to the hospital and see matron night, and they'd work out how many sausages and how many chops, you know.
Well, I become interested in the ambulance. During the war, I drove the ambulances on weekends as an honorary. And in those days, the ambulance men had quite a bit to do with the hospital. They even assisted in the theatres, in car crashes and that. Myself, I can remember quite often being in a car accident. And there'd only be Sister Bill on duty at night time, and the doctor. And I remember with Craig Duncan often, he said, come on, you can't go, you've got to come into the theatre and help Tony and Sister Bill and they are in the theatre.
It's strange to think of the size of the hospital and the area health service as it is now. I came to Gosford in 1955, and I think at that stage there were 30 beds. And of course the hospital was virtually, the care was provided by the local general practitioners and by the nursing staff.
My early memories of Gosford were the efficient, placid nature of Matron Knight, who took all this turmoil in her stride, and nothing was ever too much trouble. She coped with what I thought at the time were fairly poor resources for the amount of work that was done in the hospital. And nobody complained about the long hours they had to work or the fact that they were on call, and she did a lot of theatre call and a lot of call for x-rays. I was asked, after being at Gosford for about 3.5 years, would I like to pioneer the district nursing service in the Gosford area, and predominantly in the Woy Woy Peninsula, where there were a lot of retired people, often many of them living under fairly substandard conditions. On the 1st of June, I think it was 1956, I was launched into the district nursing service in the Woy Woy Peninsula. And the thing that really impressed me in the community was the reception by the members of the public. That they were warm, they were appreciative of anything that was done, and the support, both emotionally and financially, for that service was absolutely amazing. I can remember the day, and I happened to be in Johnny Walker's office when he said to Kath Geddes, we're starting this service in the Woy Woy area, but we can't expect to get the public support that we got in the Wyong area. And Kath, being a member of the BPW club, said, I'll see about that, we'll see about that, you'll see that you'll get the support from the Woy Woy area. Well, in fact, that particular club did a door knock appeal to support the nursing service, and in fact to purchase the first car. And they did. They raised enough money to purchase a brand new 1959 Holden car. When Matron Knight left, of course, Miss Inskip was our second matron, and it was an interesting contrast in working with two very different people. Miss Inskip was very efficient and brought the many skills that she'd had in management from her army days, because she was a captain in the Australian Army and served in all the campaigns, Middle East and New Guinea, and certainly brought her own set of skills to her job. I think my time as matron, and then when that title was redesignated Director of Nursing, of a hospital that was almost famous within the state, certainly, for its community development and its outreach programs. And even now I understand that there's a great deal of interest, and people come from not only all over Australia, but I have known people come from overseas to look at how we developed our community services, all from a small hospital that couldn't cope with the needs of the population within the walls of a hospital, and had to make the decision to extend the walls of the hospital out into the community and keep people at home, care for them at home. And I think that we've done this over the years very successfully.
Don't forget to remember me and the love that used to be. I still remember.
I joined Gosford Hospital in July 1963. The hospital in those days, we had 65 beds for a population of 65,000, and I always remember that figure in my discussions with the department, because it was 1 bed per 1,000 of population, and those 65 beds were always used to 100% occupancy. We had the additional folding beds that were always kept underneath the staircases for additional patients when they arrived, and we always looked at ourselves as a hospital which was in those days run by basically a handful of general practitioners. There was no specialist services, and the doctors worked 24-hour shifts, and with the old Pacific Highway, accidents were very high, and the doctors in those days, it was the real honorary system where they were paid by the patients who could afford it, and the rest was done on the honorary system. We were that desperately short of beds, as I said, with 1 bed per 1,000 population, that my job really at the beginning was pressurising the government of the day to provide additional beds. And our specialist services began when the additional beds in 1966 were built. In the early 70s, the government of the day, and particularly later on when what I described the Whitlam era, when the Red Scheme came onto the market, we were always in a position to do extensions at the hospital, and many buildings. I think total we spent some millions of dollars through the Red Scheme. At total employment, I think, was nearly 200 additional staff members, and I think it was 21 projects. But we always had a set of plans ready to work when we felt that the money was available. The unsung heroes basically are the hospital auxiliaries. Right from day one, I formed an attachment with all the fundraising auxiliary on the Central Coast, and much of the early development when money was short, you would only have to ask the hospital's auxiliary and hospital auxiliaries, and they would find the funds to provide whatever additional equipment was needed. And then with the development of the Pink Ladies, they provided a wonderful service to the patients, which again may not have been able to be afforded through the normal source of finances. And the community generally were always supportive of the hospital, because we needed the community support to pressure the government to provide additional facilities on the Central Coast, because we're an ever-expanding area. And it was the support that we did receive, not only from the community, the politicians, and everyone was behind the development of our services.
Today, 50 years after its inception, Gosford Hospital employs nearly 3,500 staff, provides in excess of 450 beds and a complete range of medical services for an ever-expanding population of over 230,000 people. A tribute to the 50 years of hard work and dedication of the auxiliaries, staff and the people of the Central Coast. 50 years of caring for the coast.